Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to a very special bonus episode. We have with us today Vlad Ukis. Hey Vlad, welcome to the show.
Hi Vasco, thanks for inviting me, and I'm really pleased that I got a chance to be on your show.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure to have you here. So Vlad is a leader of R&D and reliability lead at Siemens Healthnieers. In this capacity, he drives continuous delivery, SRE or site reliability engineering, and DevRel transformation. Helping this large distributed development organization evolve architecture, deployment, testing, operations, and of course, culture to implement these new processes at scale. So Vlad, we'll dive into it right away. And the first question I have is, for those of us who haven't yet heard about it, there's not too many, but I'm sure there are some. What is site reliability engineering, and why was it so important at Siemens Healthnieers?
Yeah, thanks, Vasco, for the question. So, site reliability engineering, or abbreviated SRE, is a methodology that was invented by Google many years ago and published by Google in several books explaining what it actually is. And it's, as the name suggests, a methodology to provide reliable services on the internet. So, site in SRE is actually stands for the website, so to speak, or basically some resource that you've got online and that you need to operate reliably. And of course, if you scale that to thousands of services that Google has got, then you've got a large site to manage, so to speak. But SRE also applies to smaller sites on the internet, and it's actually a general methodology that can also be applied to make reliable software in general. So I also think that it can definitely be used for on-prem software as well. Although for online software, it's probably easier to apply because that's where it's coming from. And there you've got probably simpler opportunities to gather telemetry and so on that is necessary in order to be effective with SRE.
So overall, you've already mentioned quite a few aspects of SRE. So before we dive into that, though, can you give us an insight as to how did you, at Siemens Healthnieers, how did you come to the conclusion, okay, this is the right approach and we should really start this transformation, this adoption of SRE across the whole of Siemens Healthnieers?
Right. Yeah, so first of all, we started at the Siemens Healthnieers digital health platform, which is a part of Healthnieers that has got exactly those services, digital services, which are online services that we not only develop, but also operate. So basically with the realization that actually we have to operate our services 24/7 for our customers, which was new for the company, came also the realization that we actually need some structured approach to do so. And we try to do it basically ad hoc. So, the operations engineers, they set up some alerting, and then those alerts kind of arrived, and there was then a big question, okay, who shall actually react to those alerts? And so whether it should be the operations engineers that set up the alerting, or whether it should be the developers themselves that actually wrote the code and deployed it to production. And another question was, okay, so how do I actually involve other parties there, like for instance, product owners, because you need their involvement in order to, first of all, alert on something that is reasonable from the business standpoint. And on the other hand, you need them to be involved because investing in reliability requires capacity allocation, and the product owners, they're responsible for the capacity allocation in the team. So basically, we kind of arrived at a point where we understood that in order to reconcile all these different concerns, like roles, who should be doing what, then what shall we be alerting upon, who shall react to the alerts, how to actually generally express the reliability in quantified terms, which is not a trivial question at all. We needed some structured methodology. And what we've tried before, basically just, pragmatically kind of trying to operate the product one way or another, didn't lead to success. So then we started looking around, okay, so what's actually around there? What are the methodologies that are available in order to operate the services reliably at scale? And then this is what kind of naturally led us to SRE, because that is what it is, right?
And
It's a
you talk
methodology.
scale, of course, scale.
Yeah,
I'm guessing you're not talking the same level of scale as Google. So,
right,
but you're also not talking about one or two services, right? So
right,
let's kind of perhaps like as I imagine like this, as you said, you started evolving the your own approach to managing and
right,
operating and developing these services,
right,
and then the scale aspect started to come in. Can you
right,
talk to us about where did it start to be necessary, if you will, to start bringing in more structure? Where
right,
was the level in that growth, in that scale, where you said, okay, this is no longer working in an ad hoc fashion. We need
right,
to, go out and get some best practices and start improving on this.
right, right. I would say generally, as soon as you are getting close to production, even with your first release, you are already well advised to apply SRE. So I wouldn't advise anyone to go to production without a structured approach to thinking about operating that service. So once you are over the line, once the service is in production and is used by somebody, then already at that point you'll need some basic level SRE, so to speak. And we actually iterated for longer than needed without that. And I would say you don't need scale to start applying SRE. It's rather you need SRE at the point when you start deploying to production for the first time. Of course, it'll be some basic level kind of not very advanced techniques that you would apply there, but still I think that the methodology kind of scales well, means it's applicable well at a smaller scale, and also it applies well at a bigger scale. I think
And
that's
this
also one of the
methodology
advantages.
is what you studied, you learned in practice, and you actually wrote a book about it. We'll put the link on the show notes so that people
Right.
can go and easily find the book on Amazon. And as you started to explore, like, what is the level of adoption that we need, I imagine there was a lot of questions that you are starting to answer, which of course you wrote about in the book as well. So what were some of the key questions that you would say our listeners out there should be asking themselves when it comes to supporting, operating, developing these live services as you did, and also how that became part of your own approach at Siemens Healthineers?
Yeah, right. So one of the first questions that you need to answer, if you've got already kind of an organization of some certain size, developing and operating digital services, first of all, is the alignment on operational concerns. Does everyone really understand in the organization what kind of operational concerns we've got, and how important they are, and how we are doing on them at the current moment, and whether we are improving on them over time, or whether we are stagnating, or whether things are deteriorating? Right. So that organizational alignment of the product management, product development, and product operations is absolutely necessary. And I would advise everyone who is driving operational transformation, whether using SRE or some other methodology, to really pay attention to that alignment and bring about the organizational alignment. So that's absolutely necessary. So then, if you're introducing SRE in an organization that has never done something like this, or maybe just entirely new to operating services at all, which might be the case as the organization moves to more to pay-per-use business model, moving away from a more transactional model of selling some software, then automatically you become then the owner of the service, in a sense that you need to operate it in a 24/7 way. And this is then where you need to start looking for methodologies. And if you then decide that SRE is a good methodology for aligning the organization on operational concerns, then the further steps will need to be taken in order to allocate capacity in the teams to actually adopt the methodology. And that will be required on both sides. It will be required on the side of the product operations to provide the infrastructure for the SRE infrastructure that enables the development teams then on the other side to actually operate their services efficiently.
Yeah, and I'm imagining that this becomes quite quickly an organizational transformation. So it's not about processes only. It's also, as you said, allocating capacity, defining perhaps new additions or changes to the roles that are already in place. And of course, as Scrum Masters, we are very often, involved, kind of part of these changes in the organization. And I'm sure that in the book you also have a lot of content about how to support this transformation. So what have you learned about setting up an SRE culture within Siemens Healthnieers that you can share with our Scrum Masters so that we are ready when that moment comes for us?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say, first of all, especially for Scrum Masters, it's important to have some solid background of what SRE is. So therefore, reading up on the material that's available online in books, etc.
And we'll put the link on the show notes for your book, because that's, of course, also a good place to start.
Right. So that one specifically addresses the issue of how to drive the transformation. And there are also others that describe specifically what SRE is and go much more in depth on the technical details and so on. And so once you've got some solid kind of book knowledge, some solid kind of book background of what that is, and you've read blogs, etc., so you've got some kind of understanding of what's going on in the industry and what it is that you're about to introduce, then the next step will be to seek exactly that organizational alignment on operational concerns that I mentioned earlier. So that may involve actually putting SRE onto the list of big organizational initiatives that the organization undertakes, say, in the next several years. So once it's on the list, then you need to ensure that it's prioritized accordingly so that the capacity can be allocated in the teams. So once you've got the alignment driven to the point where the SRE is on the list of organizational initiatives and is prioritized accordingly, then you've got the mandate, so to speak, to start talking to different teams and start driving the transformation. And that'll involve then working with product management, working with product development, and working with product operations. Specifically on the product operations side, you'll need to create a situation where the people in operations provide the SRE infrastructure as a framework that will be used by the development teams to enable them to operate their services. So this may be very new to the operations teams.
And one of the things that comes to mind, so we've had another episode, actually several, but the last one was with Jeff Campbell and János Csorvási, where they talked about exactly like, this kind of transformation. And one of the key things that you've already touched on today, but I would like to get your more insights on, is this separation of concerns that is typically already there, right? Like we have operations separated from development, separated from product development.
Right.
And when we talk about site reliability engineering and overall operating a live system that is under constant development, we start to see a little bit of a merge of those, right? So tell us a little bit more about this. Like, how do you see the journey typically starts? And in your mind and in your experience, where should it end in terms of, bringing these concerns together?
Right. Yeah. So basically how it starts typically is that the product management is kind of disconnected from product operations. So that's a typical situation. So they kind of think, okay, so we are the people sort of defining the product, but there is operations, they are operating the product. So that's usually what's on their mind. Then product development, if it's a really kind of a canonical organization of the last development organization of the last 20 years, so to speak, that does development, then from their point of view, product management then provides the requirements for them to implement. And then there is product operations, again, that operates that product. And then from the product operations point of view, they basically are trying to operate the product with the means that they've got. And the trouble is that they've got not a lot of means to do so because they don't have insight into the product. that much. So they are only able to operate it based on some resource-based alerts that they can set up, which are generic, like CPU consumption or memory consumption and so on. So basically, they don't go deep enough, and they don't have enough understanding of the product to operate it well semantically. And then you've got, as a result, a misaligned organization on operational concerns. So now, with the introduction of SRE, your goal as a Scrum Master, or basically a group of people driving the transformation, is then to move the organization to an aligned state. And that aligned state on operational concerns looks very different compared to the misaligned organization that I explained a couple of sentences ago. So basically, in an aligned organization, then the operations organization provides SRE infrastructure as a service to the development teams. So this may be very new to the operations organization. Why is that? Because they may never provided frameworks to be used by others in the past, because they may in the past only operated the products based on some generic IT parameters. So for them, it's about stepping into the role of software development, and not just software development, but actually framework development, so that they develop a framework, an infrastructure that can be used by others. Then for the development teams, that's of course a big change, because then they not only then develop the services, but then they use the SRE infrastructure to set up appropriate alerting so that they get alerted, which is another new thing for them, that they get alerted for something that's running in production. And then all the questions come up with, okay, so if we are having 24/7, then do we have to really be on call 24/7 or not? If so, then who is then on call during the night, out of hours, and so on. So all this, all this questioning begins and is part of the SRE transformation journey. There is not one single right answer to this, but there are many different possibilities that need to be explored and discussed and decided upon as part of the SRE transformation.
I like how you describe it, because it really gets to the core that it is about organizations. It's not technology that is the problem. We already have all of the technology. Most of the operations team already probably have all of the basic technological needs that you need in order to implement SRE. But the way you set up the teams, how much operations is responsible, how much the teams are responsible, how product takes into account the needs of operating the actual software, not just developing it, all of those things bring a lot of, I would say, not just the practices and methods that change, but even potentially organizational changes that come from that. So as you researched the book that you wrote, what did you see were the biggest obstacles, the hardest things to establish in this SRE transformation that you document and explain in the book?
Yeah. So basically, then to following on the previous explanations. So I talked about the changes in operations. I talked about the changes in development, but now there are also changes in product management, and they suddenly need to be involved with operations. How to do this and why and so on. All this questioning kind of also takes front and center of the SRE transformation. And specifically in product management, I would say this is one of the biggest challenges that you might encounter on your SRE transformation journey, because for them, the product management people, they need to see the reasons for being involved in operations. So they typically, again, if it's a canonical organization of the last 20 years, where the product management was just responsible for the definition of the product, then being implemented by development, being operated by operations engineers, for them, it's a very big change to start being involved in product operations. And you need to provide them with reasons to do so. So one way, for instance, to do so is to say, okay, so currently you've got certain level of customer escalations. If you want those customer escalations to reduce, then you need to be involved in product operations in a certain way. And then SRE provides you a structured way for involving all those different parties in operations, so that overall you've got an aligned organization that can operate the services reliably at scale. So I would say one of the biggest challenges is actually to get the product management involved in operations. And this is also critical, because then once you get them involved, then you jointly discuss things like, what shall we alert upon? And if you've got product management involved there, then you will typically then bring the alerting on the user experience being hurt. So once you hurt the user experience, then this is something that you should alert upon. And if that's the case, if your alerting then reflects well the user experience hurt, then some magical things happen. First of all, the prioritization of those issues becomes a no issue, because everyone understands, okay, so we just heard the user experience, so also the product manager is definitely in favor of fixing the user experience, right? So then the second thing is then that the motivation of the people on call, be it developers or operations, also goes up with reacting to those alerts, because they understand immediately, again, the connection of that alert to the user experience hurt. So it's no more the alert on, CPU goes up or memory goes up and there is no memory anymore, but the actual connection between the alert and the hurt user experience make the trick of aligning the organization. And in order to get there, you need the product management involved in the definition of what we alert upon. And that's a bigger change.
Yeah, I really like that you mentioned that, because it might be tempting for many, and I've seen this happen at some of my clients, it might be tempting for people to think that SRE is just a technological problem, right? Like you just tell the developer teams to do a little bit of operations and all will be fine, right? Like have the run book, standardize some stuff in operations and you're done. And one of the things that you're highlighting is that it really is about the quality of the service that we are providing. That's why SRE is there. It's not because we want the servers to not go down or to alert when they go down. It's because we want to make sure that we provide a certain level of quality for that service. And that means product needs to be involved.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I'm thinking that as a Scrum Master, maybe together with my colleagues, I'm starting to say, okay, this makes sense. In my organization, I think we need to look into this. There's also this aspect of change that we're talking about a transformation, right? Like an organizational change here, which is this establishing a sense of urgency, right? Like creating the need, creating the demand in the organization for that SRE transformation.
Right.
So in your practice, and of course also in your research, what have you found works well in organizations that want to set up that motivation, the why for adopting the SRE practices?
Right. Yeah. So many organizations come to SRE after disasters, so to speak. So you kind of think that you operate your service one way or another, but then some large-scale disaster happens. And then you are sitting there in the postmortem and trying to understand, how to improve the system. And you kind of come to the realization that kind of the system of operations just needs a complete revamp. So that's often kind of the path to SRE in organizations. And as you might know, after large-scale outages, there is also a lot of energy in an organization. And you can use that energy to channel it towards trying out SRE.
Yeah, absolutely. So that I'm assuming that there's the motivation after a large disaster to change something. Now, I'm not so sure it will always happen, but I'm sure it will happen at least sometimes. But there's also this aspect of SRE not just being about removing the outages, but actually transforming the way we work. And when I think about establishing the sense of urgency, I'm guessing that, there's probably already so many bugs in your bug tracking list that point to a problem with lack of communication between product development and operations, right? But we are not necessarily classifying those bugs as problems of communication. We're probably classifying them as, memory leaks or lack of alarms in certain situations, whatever that may be, right? So, but the question for me, maybe you have some experience, some story to tell us about Siemens Healthineers. How do we get through to the rest of the organization that this isn't about only responding to this large outage we just had? This is about fundamentally interpreting that the need of operating a live system is completely different from the need of developing a product. Like, how do you get that message across?
Right. Yeah, so that's a very fundamental question. So thanks for this. So I think it's about kind of engaging with the organization at different levels. So if you really want to drive kind of that change, then you need to engage first of all with the senior stakeholders in the organization. So you need to start kind of engaging. Okay, so what is in the head of the head of operations? What is in the head of the head of product management? What is in the head of the head of development and so on? So are they at their level aligned one way or another on operational concerns? Do they see this as kind of the most important thing in the next, say, couple of months or so, to see some concrete improvements upon? So we need to kind of start there, because it'll be such a profound change that without the leadership agreement and the leadership common mindset, you will and also the requirement on time in the teams in order to introduce something like that, you will not be able to basically pull it off. So I would say you need to kind of engage at the level of senior stakeholders. Then you need to engage at the level of, say, what's happening at Scrum of Scrums, right? So basically at the level of sort of engineering management, Scrum Masters, and so on. Basically people that are typically doing some cross-team activities, cross-team work, etc. How they see what they're doing in operations, whether that's good enough or not. And basically at some level you then also need to come to the teams and then see how they sort of perceive, what they sort of think of improving the operational capabilities than using SRE, for instance, or in general. So basically you need to kind of oscillate between going top down and bottom up, sort of.
So I'm hearing from what you're saying that it's also important to detect who at the senior management level is going to be the driver for this change, right?
Yeah, so I would say on the one hand, so yeah, that's actually another interesting aspect. I think you definitely need to achieve the organizational alignment at the top level of the organization that we want to improve operations. So then you need to make a case for, let's try doing this using SRE. And then you need to find people that would be really the SRE transformation leaders, if you wish, that would really go sort of team by team and sort of introduce it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like the fact that you mentioned that we need to engage with the organization at different levels, because it is a transformation of many different areas of the organization. And of course, if it doesn't start from the top, then it's going to be an uphill struggle. I'm reminded of simple things like, for example, many organizations will have an operations team, but operations is significantly different from cross-team and cross-organization practices. So the head of operations may have the ability to influence other executives to make the decision to go with SRE, but they don't have the power, right? Like it's not in operations that we solve the problems that SRE is supposed to solve. It's across the whole set of teams, multiple teams, product, operations, and so on.
Yeah, that's why I said earlier also, you need to put SRE onto the list of bigger organizational initiatives that the organization undertakes in the next, say, several years or so. And then you need to get that prioritized accordingly so that you can start driving the transformation. Otherwise, I think if you ignore the whole kind of organizational alignment and going top down, bottom up, and so on thing, then I think what might be possible is to kind of start doing SRE a little bit here and there, sort of in pockets in that team and in this team. But I don't think it'll be possible to pull it off as the overall kind of methodology. This is how we do operations.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point. Now, of course, for our listeners, Scrum Masters and Agile coaches out there, potentially facing this type of problems and wanting to help their organizations, we want to give one word of advice. So, Vlad, in your mind, what's one word of advice you have for our Scrum Master friends out there, probably starting to establish the SRE Foundations at the moment in the organizations that they work at?
Yeah. Think of organizational alignment. Achieve organizational alignment. That's the most important thing. Achieve organizational alignment on operational concerns. This is what SRE will help you with. But at its core, it's about achieving organizational alignment on operational concerns.
Absolutely. And for more on that, of course, we'll put the link to the book on the show notes so that you can go and absorb all the wisdom and experiences that Vlad has over the last few years. Vlad, one last question. Where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so we have published a couple of articles on InfoQ on SRE, and we'll publish a couple of more. And typically you can find me on LinkedIn. So just look for me there. And the more comprehensive account of what we've done in SRE and how to drive the SRE transformation will be in the upcoming book that you'll link in the notes, and it's going to be published this year.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Vlad, for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. I hope that that'll be helpful to lots of people driving SRE transformations around the world.
We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.